Hello, how you doing? It's Phil Thatch, and today I'm very excited because today I'm going to be trying out the Viltrox 56mm f1.4 lens for Nikon Z series APS-C cameras like the Z50 and the ZFC. This is the third one of these lenses that I've tried out. I started out with the 23, loved it, and I used the 33 and I liked it very much as well. And I'm really excited about this lens because 56mm on a 1.5 crop, that comes out to 84 millimeters. So this should be a really good portrait lens. Now I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time unboxing it because it's packaged, I believe, exactly like these other two. So if you hang around the channel a bunch, you've already seen me unbox lenses that are packaged just like this. But we'll take a quick look at it. There's some boats over there doing crazy stuff. Paperwork, a bag, and the lens really nicely packaged, just like the other ones, as I mentioned before. And the other ones have a 52mm filter thread, and I believe, yes, this one does as well. So 52mm filter thread, just like the other two. The lens hood's a little bit different. The others, this one and this one, while they're not exactly the same lens hood, they look very similar in their pedal style. This metal lens hood is flat on the end, so that's interesting. It has the exact same clickless aperture, going from f1.4 to f16, just like the other two. It's pretty stiff, which is actually good if you have it sitting someplace and you don't want it to change. But for me, I'm always going to have it all the way over here in A, and I use the front command dial on both of these cameras to adjust the aperture on this lens. It has really cool looking aperture blades. I'll show you that probably later on. I'll get a better view of the cool looking aperture blades, but I'm going to put it on the ZFC and do a little photo walk with it tonight, and I've got some other things planned. So we're going to do a lot of practicing with this lens and see how it does. Heather made this picture of me right there in the same area where we did the unboxing, and this is kind of what an 85mm or an 85mm equivalent fast lens is good at. You get a full body portrait with good separation with the background. Now you can get a full body portrait easier with a wider lens, but the separation between the subject and the background is not as good. So here we are at 1/250th ISO 220, the 56mm Viltrox lens, wide open at 1.4. We came downtown and walked on the Walnut Street pedestrian bridge for a little while, worked on some street photography. While we were hanging around near the Walnut Street Bridge, there was this Segway tour group that came by, and I made this street photography photo. This is at 1.4, and my focus point was on this guy, and he is kind of the tour leader, but he's definitely a third wheel in this. This boyfriend-girlfriend situation is not paying a whole lot of attention to the tour group leader, it seems like, and I thought this was a pretty cool street photography photo with the Viltrox. Here is a couple riding the rental Chattanooga bicycles across the Walnut Street pedestrian bridge in Chattanooga, another street photography photo with the Viltrox at golden hour. Here's a couple walking across the Walnut Street pedestrian bridge. I made this with the Viltrox at 1.4. Here is a lady going across the pedestrian bridge on her cycle board, and all she needs is Dr. Pepper, mascara, and Jesus. I thought this was a fun street photography photo that I made at 1.4 with the Viltrox. Heather and I stopped and got some ice cream at the end of the bridge, and while we were eating ice cream, I made a photo of this young man who was really enjoying his ice cream at 1.4, and you can see the bokeh balls, really great bokeh balls of some lights that were across the street from where we were eating. Here's another f1.4 shot of this mother and son as they were people watching there at the intersection of two bridges in Chattanooga, and I thought this 1.4 shot came out really interesting. For this shot, as I looked down the Walnut Street pedestrian bridge, I stopped it down to f5.6, and you can see the 18 pointed light stars that it does a pretty nice job of creating on these lights. And it was getting darker, and I made a portrait of Heather at f1.4 and 1/80th of a second, and that's another thing that's really good about a 1.4 lens. Even though it was almost completely dark, this is only 2800 ISO at f1.4. Smaller aperture would have required a lot more ISO, and it wouldn't have as beautiful a bokeh as this shot has. We came down to the Chattanooga market for just a few minutes this morning, and I made a couple pictures with the Viltrox. While we were at the Chattanooga market, I made this shot of some strawberries that are just completely out of focus in the background. Nice and sharp right here at the focus point. And here at the Chattanooga market, Heather was ordering from this taco truck, and this is Heather in the foreground, and there's the guy who's taking her order in the background, nice and sharp. I made this photograph of this vintage Volkswagen microbus camper. Just kind of thought it was really beautiful, and I liked it in color, and Heather recommended that I try it in black and white. So here is the black and white version, and I think I might like the black and white version better, but this just shows you that you can do street photography with the Viltrox 56 1.4. I was going to be doing some sports photography, and I thought, you know what, while I'm at this softball game making photographs, I might as well bring the Viltrox with me, and I thought it did really good. Look at these sports photographs made with this inexpensive Viltrox portrait lens, 56mm f1.4. It did a nice job, and it's not even supposed to be a sports lens. So way to go, Viltrox. Heather and I were over at a friend's house doing some bird photography, and while Heather was working on birds, I got the Viltrox out and made a couple of portraits of her. Here's one with the beautifully bokeh-fied background and great separation, and here is another one, and on this one, my friends have this unusual countertop made out of the front of an old Tata truck, and I thought it would make a nice background for this portrait of Heather. Now we are in Knoxville, and I'm up here with Casey. And I've been taking some pictures of Casey while I'm visiting her using the Viltrox 56 1.4. Okay, there is my daughter in Knoxville. This is at Calhoun's restaurant where we ate on the porch, and I made this portrait of her with the 56 at f1.4. We walked around the riverfront for a little while after we ate, and I made this photo of Casey as she was swinging on a swing at f1.4. Here's a nice example of the beautifully bokeh-fied backgrounds and separation you can get using an 85mm equivalent lens like the 56 1.4. This is my daughter Casey on a walking path near the Tennessee River in Knoxville at 1.4. While we were on the walking path, we saw this groundhog, and I made a photograph of it with the 56 1.4, which is absolutely not a lens that's designed for wildlife, but while there's some wildlife around, you might as well make the shot, and it did pretty good. Also, right there on the Tennessee riverfront, we saw this mated pair of Canada geese and some of their goslings swimming along, so I made this photograph at 1.4 with the Viltrox 56. While we were in Knoxville, we came over to Casey's college, the University of Tennessee, and I chased her around the campus for a while with the Viltrox 56 1.4. and made a few photos. Let's check those out. Now here we are in the Student Union at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and this is my daughter up on those really interesting looking stairs with a nicely bokeh-fied background. Here's another portrait of my daughter on those same stairs, but this one I'm a little bit more up close, and the closer you get to the subject, the more bokeh-fied the background gets. Here's a nice black and white portrait of my daughter on the campus of the University of Tennessee. I thought it turned out really nice. There's a beautiful scenic vista there at the University of Tennessee, and I made this handheld panorama. I used the Nikon Z and the Viltrox 56mm. I stopped it down to f5.6 and turned the camera vertically and made about 10 pictures, and then I brought them home and stitched them together in Lightroom, and this is how it came out. Looks really nice, and look at how much detail there is. Let's zoom in to 100% and kind of scroll around. You can see workers over here on this building. Just lots and lots of really nice detail in this handheld panorama made with the Viltrox 56mm 1.4. So it's not just a portrait lens, but I think portraits is its biggest strength, but it does well doing this as well. Here's another photograph of my daughter in another one of the many buildings there at the University of Tennessee. Here's another portrait of my daughter at the University of Tennessee, and this is an example of how a lens with a wide aperture like f1.4 can really give you good subject separation, even if the background is not way in the distance. It almost looks like a three-dimensional photograph. This is in that same area as the last portrait, but on this one I'm up close to my daughter and the background is completely out of focus. Great separation here. And this is a good example of how sharp the lens is. You can see her eyes are nice and sharp. This is a photograph inside one of the buildings at the University of Tennessee, and on this one, 1.4 helped me in a low light situation, only 900 ISO, even though it wasn't very bright at all in this building, despite all the lights you see. Here's my daughter out front of another one of the buildings at the University of Tennessee. Just a really nice portrait lens. I was very happy to be using it that day. Really like this portrait of my daughter, kind of an up-close head and shoulders type of a shot, hanging around in one of the trees there at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And here's another example of how sharp the lens is, and it works well with the Nikon ZFC eye detect autofocus. All right, now we are going to test the Viltrox 56mm f1.4 at 1.4 for video. I've got it on the Nikon ZFC right now, and let's take a peek. I appear to have a yellow box on my face as I look in the flip screen there, and it seems like it is staying on my face as I move forward and backwards. My air conditioner just kicked on, so sorry about the noise, but it looks just like the 23 and the 33 that the Viltrox 56 1.4 for the Nikon Z series APSC cameras is dynamite in video mode. 2 thumbs up. Okay, so this is what the lens looks like when it's on the Z50, and I have it on the Z50 right now because I'm using my ZFC with its flip screen to record this clip, and I'm using the Viltrox 23 1.4 to make this clip, and I absolutely love that 23 for situations like that. But as you've seen in the video, the 56 1.4 is a pretty doggone good photography lens. I did some street photography with it that you got to see, some sports photography. That blew my mind how good it did at sports photography. Street photography wasn't surprising. Did some landscape photography, made that panorama of downtown Knoxville that it did great at. But really what it's the very best at is portrait photography, because like I've mentioned, it is a 56, and you multiply that times the 1.5 crop factor, that gives you 84 millimeters, and 85 millimeters is kind of full frame, is kind of the perfect portrait lens. So really there's no competition for this lens. Nikon does not make a 56 millimeter prime lens with a wide aperture. Now they do make a 50 millimeter 1.8, and that lens is dynamite, but 50 times 1.5 is 75, and if you're looking for an 85 millimeter equivalent lens, this is the only game in town. That's the bad news. The good news is this lens is really, really good, as you've seen in the photographs that I shared with you today. So if you need a portrait lens for your DX Nikon Z series camera or your APS-C Nikon Z series camera, I highly recommend this one. The price is really good. It's $299 right now. I think it was $329 when I started working on this review, and now the price has come down to $299. That may be the permanent price, or maybe it's on sale right now. But either one, $299 or $329, I think is a bargain for what you can do with this lens. Because if you wanted to go full frame and become a portrait photographer and buy a full frame camera for $2,000 or $3,000, and then get an 85 millimeter fast prime for, gosh, some of those things are $2,800. Even the cheap ones are over $1,000 for a really fast one like this. So I think I've got to recommend this lens if you are a portrait photographer or want to be a portrait photographer and you're using the Z50 or the ZFC or any future Nikon Z series DX camera. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.